An hour before my daughter was due to walk down the aisle, my son, an FBI agent, pulled me away from the crowd and whispered, "We need to go, right now," before I could figure out what was happening. He said, "Dad, you need to hear this, before it's too late." We walked out to the parking lot. My heart started pounding. Then he looked me straight in the eye, cold as steel. "The groom isn't real." And I knew everything was about to fall apart. I'm genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time here. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining Z from today? Let's see how far this reaches. Quick note, some elements of this story are fictional, shaped for educational purposes. Names and locations are coincidental, but the message underneath all of it, that one I meant for you. The October light came through the tall windows of Dunleath. At that particular angle, it only manages in the south, long and golden and unhurried. The kind of afternoon light that makes everything look more permanent than it is. It fell across the white tablecloths, softened the candlelight, and turned the old plaster walls the color of warm honey. Outside, the live oaks that had stood on these 40 acres for over a century held perfectly still in the early evening air, their Spanish moss hanging without a whisper of movement. I had been standing in the same corner of the reception hall for nearly 20 minutes, holding a glass of bourbon I had not once lifted to my lips. My name is Everett Calhoun, 68 years old, retired architect out of Savannah, Georgia, 30 years of designing hospitals, courthouses, and schools that I still drive past, occasionally just to confirm they're still standing. My wife Dorothea and I had made the 4-hour drive from Savannah to Natchez 2 days ago for our daughter Marlo's wedding, her second wedding, if we're being precise about it. And on an evening like this one, in a place like Dunleath, with its white Greek revival columns and its candlelit rooms and its century-old oak canopy stretching over the grounds, precision felt like the least I owed the situation. I brought the glass up, one stop short of drinking, and set it back down. Dunleath is the kind of venue that tries to make you feel like history has been kind to everyone who's passed through it. Antebellum architecture meticulously restored, the sort of place that photographs beautifully from every angle. As an architect, I can tell you exactly how that effect is achieved, the proportions of the columns, the symmetry of the facade, the way the interior draws your eye upward. Good bones, as we say in the trade. But I also know that good bones and good foundations are not always the same thing. I have seen beautiful buildings with problems hidden so deep inside their walls that no inspection would catch them until the damage was already done. That thought had been circling me all evening without landing anywhere useful. Across the room, Dorothea moved between tables with the practiced ease of a woman who spent 35 years managing a classroom full of 7-year-olds. She had a gift for people always had the ability to make every person she spoke to feel like the most important one in the room. She caught my eye once and gave me that small, knowing look that meant she was aware I was standing in a corner overthinking something and had decided to let me work through it at my own pace. After 41 years of marriage, we had long since stopped needing full sentences for that kind of conversation. My daughter Marlo stood near the center of the hall with her maid of honor, Vesper Hale, a Nashville interior designer who had been Marlo's closest friend since their college days at Belmont. Marlo was 34, a commercial photographer with a studio in Nashville, and she was luminous in the way brides are supposed to be, dark hair pinned up, dress moving when she moved. A smile that lit the room. She was laughing at something Vesper had just said. It was a good laugh, but it broke just a half second too quickly and lasted just a beat too long. And I noticed because I am her father, and fathers notice these things whether they want to or not. Her first marriage had ended 7 years ago. I won't dwell on the details. What matters is that I saw it coming and said nothing, because I had convinced myself that a father who keeps his mouth shut is a father who keeps his daughter. I spent a long time after the divorce questioning whether that particular piece of wisdom had been wisdom at all or just a comfortable name for something less honorable. I was not going to make that mistake again, whatever that meant. I hadn't yet decided what it meant. Near the dance floor, my older daughter Beatrix stood beside her husband. Garrus and she, a civil litigator in Atlanta, he a surgeon, both of them the kind of steady and composed that makes the people around them instinctively lower their voices. Beatrix was watching Calloway with an expression I recognized but couldn't immediately name, the expression of someone running a quiet calculation. And Calloway Reed, my daughter's husband-to-be, was working the room with a fluency that was genuinely impressive. 42 years old, well-built. with an open face and the kind of easy confidence that reads as warmth before you look at it too closely. He remembered every name. He laughed at the right moments. He asked questions and held eye contact while he listened to the answers. An older woman near the gift table had been talking at him for 10 minutes straight, and he had given her his complete attention and somehow made her feel like she was the most interesting person in Natchez, Mississippi. I watched all of that and told myself it was enough. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and touched the watch, a gold Waltham pocket watch, thin and worn smooth, that had passed from my grandfather to my father to me. In the Calhoun family, it was the tradition you gave it to your son-in-law on the wedding day. Welcome to the family. You are trusted with something irreplaceable. I had been carrying it since 7 that morning. Across the room, the jazz quartet led by a musician named Shepard eased into something slow and familiar, and the candlelight steadied. And for one long moment, everything in that room looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. Then I found Cassian. My youngest son was 36, standing against the far wall with a glass of club soda, and he was not smiling. More than that, his shoulders carried a deliberate stillness that had nothing to do with boredom, and his eyes were moving across the room with the focused, methodical quality of a man who was working, not socializing, working. He wasn't taking in the party. He was tracking something inside it. Our eyes met across the length of the hall. He held my gaze 2 seconds longer than a casual glance requires. Then he began to move, not through the center of the room, but along its edges, staying out of the chandelier, light stepping around conversations without joining them, patient and unhurried and completely deliberate. I set the bourbon down on the nearest table. I had been holding it for 20 minutes without drinking, and standing there watching my son move through the shadows at the edge of my daughter's wedding. I understood the way you sometimes understand things a full breath, before your mind catches up, that I was not going to drink it at all. He reached me without anyone noticing him do it. That was the first thing I registered, not what he said, but the fact that a grown man had crossed a room full of 120 people and arrived at my side without drawing a single glance. I had watched him move from the far wall, and even knowing what I was looking at, I almost lost him twice. He had a way of timing his steps to the natural breaks in conversation, pausing when someone turned, moving when attention shifted elsewhere, like water finding the low path through rock. Cassian had been like that since he was a boy, though I hadn't always recognized it for what it was. He was the kind of child who asked why about everything. Why does this road curve here? Why does that building have windows on 3 sides, but not the 4th? Why do people say one thing and mean another? It wore on me some when he was young. I wanted answers that satisfied, and he wanted answers that were true, and those are not always the same thing. I used to tell Dorothea that our youngest son had the gift of making every simple conversation feel like a deposition. Standing beside me now, I understood that what I had mistaken for stubbornness had always been something else entirely, something trained, something useful. He stopped at my left shoulder and turned to face the window exactly as I was facing it, to anyone watching from across the room. We were just a father and son standing together at the edge of the party, looking out at the oak trees in the last of the October light. The kind of quiet moment that happens at every wedding, unremarkable and unmemorable. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Dad." A pause of exactly 1 breath. "We need to leave, now." I heard the words clearly. The jazz quartet was playing something low and unhurried 20 feet away, and the nearest cluster of guests was caught up in a conversation about football. And none of that noise quite reached us here. I heard every syllable. I didn't move. "The ceremony starts in less than an hour," I said. I kept my voice at the same register he had used, quiet, aimed at the window. "There are 120 people in this room. Your mother is—" "I know." He said it without interrupting, which was somehow worse. Like he had already accounted for everything I was about to say. "Trust me, not here." Not a request. I want to be precise about that. It had the shape of a request, the word trust, the softness of the delivery, but it carried the weight of something else. An instruction from someone who had done the math and was offering me the courtesy of a choice without actually leaving me one. I turned my head and looked at my son for the first time since he had arrived at my side. Cassian was 36 years old, lean and composed with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to spend a lot of time waiting without letting the waiting show. He was still looking out the window. His glass of club soda hung loosely from his right hand, the gesture of a man at a party, and everything else about him said something different. The set of his jaw, The way his weight was distributed, not relaxed, but ready balanced, in a way that had nothing to do with standing around at a wedding reception. There was no worry in his face. That was what settled it. I have known my share of anxious men over the years, men who came to me with structural concerns about buildings they were responsible for, men who had found something they couldn't explain and needed someone else to tell them they were wrong. They always had that look, the specific tight expression of a person, hoping the thing they've noticed isn't actually there. Cassian didn't have that look. What he had instead was something I could only describe as cold certainty, the face of a man who had already moved past, hoping he was wrong, and was now operating on the fact that he wasn't. I looked back across the room. Marlo was standing near the center of the hall with Calloway beside her, accepting congratulations from a couple I vaguely recognized from her Nashville circle. She had her hand through his arm, and she was laughing at something the woman had just said. The laugh came easy and bright, and Calloway turned to her as it did the attentive new husband, delighted by his wife, and smiled. And I saw it, or I let myself see it, which is maybe closer to the truth. The smile was precise. That was the word that came to me. And once it came, I couldn't unsee what it described. Every element of it was correct. The warmth, the timing, the slight crinkle at the corners of his mouth. But his eyes didn't change when it arrived. They were already moving, already scanning, taking a quiet inventory of the room, while his mouth performed something that looked exactly like joy. 30 years of assessing structures had taught me the difference between load-bearing and decorative. Some elements hold the building up, others just make it look like they do. I turned back to Cassian. He was watching me with that same steady patience, still not quite looking at me directly, still maintaining the comfortable fiction of two people enjoying the view from a window. Waiting for me to finish the calculation he already knew the answer to. "Okay," I said, one word. He gave me a single nod in return, small, unhurried, as if this outcome had never really been in doubt, and set his club soda down on the windowsill. We moved toward the side exit together, passing close enough to the nearest table that I could have reached out and touched the floral arrangement. No one turned, no one called after us. The music continued its slow and easy progress through the evening, and the candles held their light, and behind us the party went on without a single missed beat. I did not look back at Marlo. I was afraid of what I would see if I did. Not the truth. I think some part of me had been circling the truth all evening. What I was afraid of was the look on her face in that last unguarded moment before she realized I was gone, and whether it would be the face of a woman who was happy, or the face of a woman who was trying very hard to appear that way. The side door opened onto the evening air. It was cooler than I expected, and darker, and I stepped through it without knowing what was waiting on the other side of the conversation my son had not yet started. The air outside was different in a way that was almost a relief, cooler by 10 degrees at least, and carrying the particular smell of October in the deep south damp grass. Fallen leaves beginning their slow return to earth, the faint mineral edge of the Mississippi, somewhere in the distance. The gravel under my shoes felt solid in a way the polished floors inside did not. Above us, the live oaks closed their canopy against the last light of the evening, their branches so thick and interlocked that only narrow threads of amber sky showed through. I turned once and looked back at the windows of the reception hall. Through the glass, the warm light inside made the whole scene look like a painting. Figures in formal dress moving between tables, the soft pulse of candlelight, and there near the center of it all, the unmistakable silhouette of Marlo beside the man she was about to marry. A painting. I had always trusted beautiful things because I had spent my career making them. That thought sat differently now. Cassian stopped when we were far enough from the building that the music from inside had become something ambient and indistinct. He didn't look around to see if anyone had followed us out. He didn't check over his shoulder. He simply turned to face me with the directness of a man who had been waiting 14 months to have this conversation and had decided this was where it happened. "I'm a special agent with the FBI," he said, "financial crimes unit out of the Memphis field office." I knew Cassian worked for the FBI. He had told us when he was hired 11 years ago. And Dorothea had cried quietly in the kitchen that evening while I stood there trying to decide how I felt about it. But knowing your son works for a federal law enforcement agency is an abstract thing. It lives in a compartment somewhere alongside the general awareness that the world contains danger and that some people are paid to stand between it and the rest of us. You don't think about what it means in any specific way. standing in the gravel parking lot of a wedding venue in Natchez, Mississippi, watching my son's face carry the particular gravity of a man on duty. I thought about it in a very specific way for the first time. "I've been investigating the man your daughter is about to marry for 14 months, Cassian said. 2 weeks ago, I formally coordinated with the FBI field office in Jackson. They have jurisdiction over Mississippi operations, so any official action here runs through them. This is a sanctioned investigation. There are 2 agents from the Jackson office positioned outside the perimeter of this property right now. The Mississippi field office. Agents waiting outside. A 14-month investigation." I did the arithmetic on those numbers and arrived at a figure that took the air out of my chest. "You've known about this," I said, "for 14 months. "I've been building a case for 14 months, he said. "There's a difference. Suspicion isn't evidence. I wasn't going to bring this to you or to Marlo until I had enough to stand on." He paused just briefly and something crossed his face that was not quite the composed professionalism of a moment ago. Something younger, something that knew who it was talking to. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner." I nodded. I didn't entirely trust my voice just then. "Tell me," I said. He did. The name Calloway Reed Cassian explained is a real name. It belongs to a real person, a 43-year-old man from Pensacola, Florida, with a clean record, a verifiable work history and commercial insurance, and no connection whatsoever to Marlo or to our family. The man inside that reception hall had taken that name and built a life around it, a fabricated life, constructed with considerable skill and patience. When the FBI ran his fingerprints obtained through a professional contractor licensing application, Calloway had filed with the Tennessee Department of Commerce, a standard requirement for anyone seeking a commercial real estate development license in the state. They found no match in any federal database. Not in the criminal index, not in the civil records, not in any of the systems that accumulate the normal paper trail of a life lived under a real name. The man's fingerprints did not exist, officially anywhere. His academic credentials, a business degree from the University of Georgia, listed on every professional profile he maintained, had been verified as fraudulent. The university had no record of him. His professional history, which described 15 years of work in commercial real estate development, had been traced to a series of shell entities and defunct companies that dissolved shortly after being used, and his LinkedIn profile, which Marlo had shown me the first week they were dating, pointing to it as evidence that he was who he said he was, had been created 3 years ago by a third party populated with fabricated endorsements and employment history, and carefully aged to appear legitimate. I stood in the gravel and the oak filtered dark and tried to hold the shape of what I was hearing. The thing about discovering that a structure has been built on a false foundation is that it doesn't change the way the building looks from the outside. It still stands. The columns are still plumb. The windows still square. The facade still carries every impression of solidity it was designed to carry. What changes is your understanding of how long it has left. "There's more," Cassian said. He had been watching me, the process giving me the time I needed without filling the silence, which told me he had done this before, delivered information to people, and then waited while the weight of it settled. "But I need you to be ready to hear it." I looked at my son, standing in the last light of an October afternoon, surrounded by trees that had been there long before either of us, and would be there long after. And I thought about all the years I had wished he would just accept an answer and stop asking why. I was not ready. I was certain of that. "Go ahead," I said anyway. He told me about a man named Orson Whitfield. The parking lot had grown darker in the few minutes we'd been standing in it, the last of the daylight retreating above the oak canopy, while the property's exterior lamps began their slow warm-up, casting thin yellow pools across the gravel. Somewhere behind us, muffled by distance and old brick walls, Shepard's quartet was still playing. I could feel the bass notes more than hear them. The whole evening had taken on that quality. Things felt at a remove, processed through some new layer of understanding that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. Orson Whitfield was 61 years old, Cassian told me. Former chairman of a mid-sized commercial construction company based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind of regional firm that builds office parks and medical facilities and the occasional mixed-use development. The backbone work of the industry that nobody writes about but everybody depends on. He had built the company over 30 years alongside his wife Margaret. They had no children. The business was their life's work, and when Orson sold his stake in it at 58, The proceeds were supposed to carry them comfortably into old age. I knew the type of man Cassian was describing before he finished the sentence. I had worked alongside men like Orson Whitfield for 3 decades, practical competent, quietly proud of what they had built, deeply skeptical of anything that sounded too good. The kind of man you would expect to see through a con, which is, I suppose, exactly the point. 2 years ago, a man introduced himself to Orson at a commercial real estate conference in Knoxville. He gave his name as Elliot Mercer. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, and came with a business card from a development consultancy that, as the FBI would later establish, existed only as a registered LLC with a virtual office address and a professionally designed website. Mercer spent 3 meetings over 6 weeks presenting Orson with a detailed investment opportunity in a commercial mixed-use development outside Knoxville's site. Plans, financial projections, permits, letters of intent from anchor tenants. All of it fabricated. Every document, every projection, every signature. Orson invested $380,000. Elliot Mercer disappeared. The money, routed through a series of accounts across 3 states before the trail went cold, disappeared with them. I stood in the gravel and did not say anything for a moment. In 30 years of architecture, I had seen projects collapse, contracts fail, partnerships dissolve. I had watched good people lose significant money to bad decisions and worse luck. But there is a specific category of loss that sits differently from all of those, the kind that comes not from miscalculation or misfortune, but from deliberate, patient, carefully constructed deceit. The kind where someone looked at a decent man and saw a resource to be extracted. His wife, Cassian said. He paused in a way that told me the next part cost him something to say. Margaret passed away 8 months after the money was gone. The stress of it, the financial pressure, the investigation going nowhere, the shame of it, she'd told almost no one. It hit her health hard. She had a heart condition the family knew about. Her doctors said the stress accelerated things significantly. The oak trees held their stillness above us. Orson spent the next 14 months doing what law enforcement couldn't do fast enough, Cassian continued. He tracked this man on his own. Not recklessly, he was methodical about it. He documented everything, preserved. Everything didn't interfere with anything that might compromise a prosecution. He's not a man who does things halfway. A brief pause. About 5 months ago, he identified that Elliot Mercer, operating under yet another name, had made contact with a woman in Nashville, a photographer. He cross-referenced what he could find and connected her to our family. I looked at my son. He called the tip line, Cassian said. The case landed on my desk because of the financial crimes angle and the multi-state activity. When I ran the name against our existing investigative threads, I found 3 prior aliases with similar patterns across 4 states. That's when 14 months became a formal investigation. I thought about the things I had noticed about Calloway and chosen not to examine too closely. The cash payments he had covered the venue deposit for this wedding himself in full. A personal check that cleared without issue, but that I had thought briefly was an unusual way to handle that kind of transaction. The way he deflected certain questions, not rudely, never rudely, but with the practiced smoothness of someone who had long since developed a repertoire of responses designed to satisfy without informing. The guest list for this wedding contained not one person from his past. No college roommate, no former colleague, no cousin from wherever he claimed to be from. I had noticed all of it. I had filed it away under the heading of things that were probably nothing. Where is he now? I asked. Orson. Inside, Cassian said. Not in the reception hall. I have him in one of the family suites down the hall from the main entrance. Dunleath keeps a few private rooms for wedding parties. He came in through the side entrance 2 hours ago. He glanced toward the building briefly. He cut his hair shorter than he used to wear it. He's got a beard now. He didn't have one before. Different glasses. He's changed enough that a casual look won't place him. But if Calloway gets a long, direct look at him in good light, there's a real chance of recognition. Men who live the way Calloway lives learn to read faces. It's a survival skill for them. He said it with a flatness that told me he was not speaking theoretically. So we keep them separated until you decide the moment is right, I said. Until the moment is right, Cassian agreed. Orson understood the conditions when he agreed to come. He's been waiting 14 months. He can wait another hour. And then Cassian said the thing that settled into my chest and stayed there. He made a promise to Margaret before she passed. He sat beside her in the hospital, and he told her he would find the man who did this to them, that he wouldn't let him do it to anyone else. Cassian looked at me steadily. Tonight is that promise. I turned toward the windows of the reception hall. The warm light behind the glass looked exactly as it had when I first stepped outside, golden and contained the candlelit tableau of a celebration in progress. The silhouettes of guests moving through an evening that still believed itself to be a wedding. It had not changed at all. That was the thing I couldn't get past. Inside that room, nothing had changed. The music was still playing, the flowers were still arranged in their careful clusters. And the man who had taken $380,000 from a decent man in Knoxville and then stood beside a hospital bed while that man's wife declined was still standing in the candlelight, accepting congratulations with a handshake that people would later describe as warm. I did not find the light behind those windows beautiful anymore. I am not sure I could have explained right then exactly what I found it. Some truths arrive with noise, with shouting, with the crash of something breaking. Others arrive quietly in a parking lot under the last light of an October evening, handed to you on a phone screen in a format so clean and official it almost doesn't feel real. This one arrived quietly. Cassian turned the phone toward me without preamble. The screen showed a bank document, a transfer confirmation formatted in the spare. Bureaucratic language of financial institutions that have no interest in how their paperwork lands on the people reading it. I read the account name at the top, Marlo A. Calhoun. I read the amount in the center column, $95,000. I read the destination Meridian Capital Partners, LLC, registered state of Delaware. I read all three of these things, and then I looked up at Cassian because reading them once was not going to be enough, and I knew it, but I needed a moment before I read them again. That account, I said. My voice had gone dry in a way I did not recognize. That's the one I opened with her, 4 years ago when she first moved to Nashville. We went to the bank together on a Saturday morning. She ordered coffee and I didn't. It's a joint account, Cassian said. Your name is still listed as secondary holder. You've never used it. Marlo has managed it entirely since you set it up, but under the account agreement both parties retain full transaction authorization. I understood the implication without him having to diagram it. The account had my name on it. Anything moved out of it carried the weight of that name, whether I had touched it or not. The $95,000, I said. Where did it originate? Marlo transferred it in from the savings account you established jointly after her first marriage ended. The funds you put aside specifically to give her a stable floor. He paused for just a moment, the way he does when he is giving someone time to absorb something before the next layer arrives. The transfer was made 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago. I mapped it backward involuntarily. Marlo and Calloway had been engaged for 4 months by then. We had been to Beatrix's for dinner. Dorothea had been reviewing catering menus. I had spent a Sunday afternoon on the back porch in Savannah, helping Marlo decide between 2 photographs for the reception table displays, holding them up in the light, discussing the quality of the afternoon shadows. 7 weeks ago, I was discussing photograph shadows while $95,000 moved out of an account with my name on it. Is it recoverable? I asked. We're actively working with the Financial Crimes Unit to determine the current status. The Delaware LLC has no active business filings and no registered agent as of 3 weeks ago. The receiving account was opened 6 months before the transfer and has had 7 inbound transactions, no legitimate outbound movement, except 1 wire to a Nevada account we're still tracing. He looked at me steadily. I can't give you a number yet. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. I'm sorry. 6 months before the transfer, I found myself moving backward through time again, the way you move through a building. You know well, when the lights have gone out by memory, by the feel of the walls. 6 months ago. On a Thursday afternoon, I had been replacing a rotted fence post in the side yard when my phone rang. I remember pulling off my work gloves to answer. Marlo's voice had that particular quality it gets when she's genuinely excited about something, not loud, but focused like a lens that is just locked onto a point of clarity. Dad. Calloway found this incredible opportunity. A commercial real estate fund, regional properties. The return projections are really solid. He says it's exactly the kind of thing you'd have looked at during your career. I had listened. I had said, that sounds interesting, sweetheart. I had not asked about the structure of the fund, the identity of the principals, the registration documents, the fee schedule. I had not asked because I did not want to be the father who reflexively finds the weakness in everything his daughter brings him. I did not want her to feel that my first response to her happiness was suspicion. I had given her room, and the room had cost her $95,000. He never touches the money himself, Dad. Cassian said it carefully. The way you say something to someone you know is going to need to hear it more than once. That's how he avoids leaving a paper trail. He uses Marlo. She signs. She transfers. She moves the funds. If anything reaches a court, her name is on every document, not his. I let that settle. The joint account authorization, I said. Marlo signed it. She did, voluntarily under the impression it was part of a co-investment structure between her and Callaway. She's the co-owner of that account. Her authorization was legally sufficient. There was nothing irregular about the transaction from the bank's perspective. Of course there wasn't. I was not angry at Cassian for saying it. I was not angry at the bank. The anger was there, and somewhere beneath the surface, but it had not yet found its shape. And the next step, Cassian moved forward through it without being asked. After the wedding, once Marlo and Callaway left for the honeymoon, he would have returned to the investment conversation. He would have framed it as a natural expansion, a family security structure, a way to protect Dorothea and me in retirement, positioned as a gesture of responsibility from a new son-in-law who wanted to demonstrate that he took the family's future seriously. Marlo would sign the authorization. She would believe she was doing something good. Within 72 hours of that signature, the full balance $640,000 from our joint retirement account would have been wired through the same LLC structure and would not exist in any recoverable form. I stood in the parking lot of Dunleath Historic Inn in the cooling October evening and did the arithmetic that no father should ever have to do. 30 years of work. Dorothea's 35 years in a classroom, coming home in the evenings with chalk on her sleeves. The vacations we had not taken, the renovations we had deferred, the careful, unglamorous accumulation of a life lived within its means because we believed that patience compounded. $640,000, 72 hours. He never signs anything himself, I said. Not a question. A structure assessed and found to be exactly what it was. I opened my eyes and looked at Cassian directly. The lamp above us cast a steady light across his face, and he looked back at me with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 14 months carrying information that was not yet his to share, and is now watching the moment when sharing it lands. Does Marlo understand? I said, each word placed carefully and deliberately. What she's been used for. My son looked at me. He did not answer. And the silence that followed was heavier than anything he could have said, because in it lived every possibility, and I was not yet certain which one I was most afraid of. I used to tell my students the ones who came through the firm as junior draftsmen fresh from their programs, still believing that architecture was primarily about vision, that the smallest detail in a drawing is often the one that determines everything, a single misplaced dimension, a tolerance written wrong, something so minor you could miss it in a dozen reviews, and then one day the wall doesn't meet the floor, and you spend 3 weeks understanding why. I never imagined someone would apply that principle to my family. Cassian reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, not his phone this time, but a folded sheet of paper, the kind of matte finish that comes from a portable printer rather than a photo lab. He unfolded it carefully and held it out to me with both hands. The way you hand something to someone when you want them to understand that what they are about to receive requires their full attention. I took it. The image was a wide shot, a networking session, the kind of mid-afternoon break between panels where everyone circulates with coffee cups and name badges and talks about the things they cannot say in the formal sessions. Round tables with white linens, a banner visible in the upper right corner of the frame, Nashville Business Development Summit, March 2019. The photograph had the particular quality of an event image taken by an official conference photographer, competent, well-lit, designed to document rather than to interpret. In the lower left quadrant of the image, slightly off-center, was a cluster of 8 people arranged in the informal geometry of a networking conversation. Several of them were mid-sentence. One was laughing. 2 were shaking hands. One of the 2 men shaking hands was me. I was wearing the charcoal jacket I bought the winter before Dorothea had picked it out. Said it made me look like I still knew what year it was. I had a name badge on my lapel. I was smiling the way you smile when you are shaking hands with someone you have just met at a professional event. And the conversation has been pleasant, and you have no reason in the world to feel anything other than pleasant. The man whose hand I was shaking had dark hair worn slightly longer than was typical for the setting, a close-trimmed beard, and a navy suit with no tie. He was also smiling. His head was turned 3/4 toward the camera in a way that suggested he had not noticed it. I looked at the photograph for a long time, then I looked at the eyes. You can change hair. You can change the beard, the suit, the name on the badge, the way you carry yourself in a room. You can reconstruct almost everything about a person's external presentation if you are patient and deliberate and have reasons to be thorough. You cannot change the eyes. Not really. Not in a way that holds up when someone who has been an architect for 30 years looks at the geometry of a face the way he looks at the geometry of a structure measuring proportions, identifying load-bearing elements, cataloging what is permanent and what is decorative. The man in the photograph with his hand in mine was Callaway Reed. March 2019, I said. My voice came out, even which surprised me. The Nashville Business Development Summit, 3-day event at the Renaissance Nashville Hotel. You presented a paper on the second afternoon adaptive reuse and historic preservation. You stayed for the full conference. Cassian kept his voice level and informational, the way he does when he is letting the facts carry the weight rather than his interpretation of them. He was registered under a different name. We've confirmed the alias through the attendee database. How did you find the photograph? Facial recognition, cross-reference. We ran Callaway's confirmed biometrics against publicly available event imagery within geographic radius of known Calhoun family locations, Savannah, Nashville, Atlanta. The summit was the earliest match. The conference photographer posted the full image library to the event website within 2 weeks of the conference. It's been publicly accessible ever since. He didn't know the photograph existed. Almost certainly not. Conference photographers at events that size produce hundreds of images. The library doesn't get indexed by a name. There's no tagging. No facial identification on the site itself. To know a specific image existed, you'd have to either be looking for it deliberately or have access to the kind of recognition tools we have. Cassian paused. It's the only documented error we've found in 5 years of operational record. One afternoon at one conference captured in a frame he didn't see being taken. I folded the photograph along its original crease and held it in both hands and looked at the oak trees at the far end of the parking lot, where the last of the daylight was failing in the branches. I started to remember. It came back the way things come back when you have filed them, under unremarkable, not in a rush, but in pieces each one ordinary until they were placed next to the others. A man at the networking break. Friendly, engaged, the kind of person who asks questions and listens to the answers rather than waiting to speak. He had asked about my work, what kind of projects I took on in retirement, whether I missed the larger commissions. He had asked about Savannah, whether I liked it, whether my family was there or scattered. I had told him about Marlo. I remembered it now with a clarity that felt like a physical sensation, something pressing against the inside of my ribs. She had recently moved to Nashville. I had told him set up her photography studio, was building her client list. Talented, independent, doing well. I had been proud. That was the thing I could not escape. I had been proud. And the pride had made me generous with the details the way pride does. Her name, her city, her work. The fact that she was a photographer, the kind of specific professional detail that a man who wanted to research her afterward could use to find everything else he needed within 20 minutes. I had offered all of it freely across a conference table with white linens and coffee cups to a man whose name I had already forgotten by the time I boarded my flight home. He didn't target Marlo that afternoon, Cassian said quietly. We don't believe she was a specific objective in 2019. He was profiling broadly, gathering information across multiple families, all multiple prospects. Nashville became a focus of his operation 2 years later when he moved into the Tennessee market. But when he focused on Nashville, I said, he already had a name, a profession, a neighborhood. Because I gave them to him. I said it the way you say something, when you have been trying not to say it, and the effort of not saying it has become greater than the thing itself. I told him where she lived. My voice was very quiet, not directed at Cassian, directed at the photograph in my hands, at the version of myself in it who was smiling and shaking hands and feeling nothing but the ordinary satisfaction of a good conference. I told him what she did for work, I gave him everything he needed to find her. The parking lot was silent, except for the distant sound of Shepard's band and the cooling wind moving through the oak canopy above us. Then I felt Cassian's hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just placed it there steady without pressure and left it. My son, who had spent 14 months building a case that could not be compromised by a premature warning, who had carried the weight of knowing what I did not know and had done so, because the work required it. My son put his hand on my shoulder and did not say a single word. And somehow, that was the only thing in the world that was right. The wind came in from the river. I had not noticed it. While we were standing under the oak canopy, the trees absorbed. It broke it into pieces, turned it into something local and contained. But when Cassian and I moved toward the edge of the parking lot, where the grounds opened up toward the west and the last of the afternoon light lay flat across the estate, the wind found us. It carried the particular smell of the Mississippi in October, damp soil, old water. Distance, the kind of smell that reminds you that the river has been moving through this landscape for longer than any building on it and will continue long after every building is gone. I stopped walking, not because I had lost my direction, because I needed 30 seconds to choose it deliberately. My hand moved to my jacket pocket without any instruction. From my conscious mind found the shape of the pocket watch through the fabric, the familiar weight and curve of it, the small raised letters of the engraving on the case. I had carried it for 22 years, since my father placed it in my hands at a moment very different from this one. I had brought it tonight intending to place it in Calloway Reed's hands as a gesture of welcome, a transfer of trust. The kind of thing you do when you believe the man your daughter has chosen deserves the full weight of what your family has built. I took my hand out of my pocket without removing the watch. "Why not now?" I said. Cassian had been watching me. He had developed, sometime in the last 10 years, I had not been paying close enough attention. The capacity to wait without filling silence, to simply hold a space open until whoever he was with was ready to step into it. "Walk with me," he said. We moved along the outer edge of the grounds past the back of the main house where the columned rear facade faced west and caught the last horizontal light of the evening. The corridor that ran along the garden side of the property, a wide stone walkway open on one side to the grounds, roofed by a wisteria-covered pergola, gave a clear sightline south toward the bluffs, and beyond them, the river. Cassian had clearly moved through this property more than once. He knew which path offered sight without exposure. 120 guests, he said. 43 of them in the main hall, at last, count the rest distributed between the terrace, the bar corridor, and the catering area. Calloway has been working that room for 4 hours. He knows exactly where every exit is. He has been mapping it. You think he'd run. I think that if Calloway Reed feels cornered in a room full of civilians, his response is unpredictable. We have documented 2 prior instances in which he became verbally aggressive under pressure. One of them escalated to a physical altercation with a victim's family member. Cassian paused. In a room with 120 people, including your wife, your daughter in a wedding dress, and a jazz band, unpredictable is the one variable we cannot accept. I absorbed that. It was the kind of analysis I recognized not from law enforcement, but from 30 years of assessing what happens when structural systems fail under load. You do not demolish a building by taking the most direct path to the weight-bearing element. You clear the surrounding area first. You stage the approach. You control the debris field before you make the first cut. "The main gate," I said. "Homachito Street. Wrought iron, 1-lane, single point of entry and exit." Cassian looked at me with something in his expression that I chose not to examine too carefully because I suspected it was surprise. "2 Jackson agents," he confirmed. He posted on the street side. "The arrest warrant is issued and served. Once Calloway exits through that gate, we have him in a contained area with no civilian exposure and no exit variables." He paused. "The goal is to bring him to that gate, not to chase him to it. And Orson. Orson is in the private family suite on the 2nd floor north corridor. He has agreed to come down to the main hall once I give the signal, at a point when we are certain Calloway is positioned in a way that does not give him a direct sightline to the entrance." Cassian's voice remained level. Orson's in-person identification of Calloway, made in the presence of a cooperating FBI witness and documented on video, strengthens the evidentiary record significantly. It is not legally required for the arrest, but it is the difference between an arrest and a conviction. I thought about Orson Whitfield in a room upstairs, in a building he had entered, knowing that the man who had taken everything he had was 40 feet below him on the other side of a floor. I thought about what that required of a person, a 61-year-old man who had driven to Natchez, Mississippi on a Saturday in October, who had changed his appearance and agreed to hold his position and wait because he had made a promise to his wife, and he intended to keep it. "What do you need from me?" I said. Cassian outlined it the way he would outline a field operation to a colleague, precisely without ornament. I would re-enter the hall through the side entrance near the garden. I would approach Calloway naturally in the way that a father-in-law at a wedding reception approaches a son-in-law, warm, conversational. No indication of anything other than the ordinary social dynamics of the occasion. My objective was not to confront him or to extract a confession. My objective was to keep him engaged, relaxed, positioned in the main hall and away from Marlo long enough for Orson to be brought down and placed where he needed to be. When that moment arrived, when I could see that Calloway was separated from Marlo by enough physical and social distance that Orson's entrance could be managed, I would touch my left lapel. Once, clearly. "And then you step back," Cassian said. "You let us work." I looked out at the river. The Mississippi was bronze in the failing light, broad and indifferent and continuous, the same water that had moved past this bluff when the house behind us was built, when it was young. When the people who built it believed they were constructing something permanent. The river had outlasted every certainty they had. 30 years of marriage. 35 years of Dorothea building something out of other people's children because she believed it mattered. Marlo at 9 years old, photographing the backyard with a disposable camera. I had bought her as a joke, holding it with both hands because she was serious about it even then. $640,000. 72 hours. I turned to look at my son, in the angled evening light with the columned facade of Dunleath behind him and the river in the distance. Cassian looked like a man I was meeting for the first time, and recognizing simultaneously the way you recognize a building from its drawings before you have ever stood inside it. The precision, the economy of movement, the willingness to carry weight without making a show of it. I had spent years being quietly frustrated by qualities I was now understanding were exactly the qualities that had brought us to this moment. He looked at me, and for just a moment, the professional stillness dropped entirely. Not the FBI agent, just the youngest of my 3 children standing in the last of the October light, asking me a question he could not ask in any official capacity. "You sure about this, Dad?" I reached into my jacket pocket one final time, felt the weight of the pocket watch, left it there. "I'm sure," I said. I turned toward the side entrance of Dunleath Historic Inn. The door was set into the stone beneath the columned arcade lit from inside, warm light against the cooling evening. Through the glass, I could hear the muffled sound of Shepard's quartet drifting through the hall and beyond it, the low current of 120 people who did not yet know what the next 30 minutes would bring. I walked toward it. This step was different from the first one I had taken out into the parking lot an hour ago. That step had been reflexive the involuntary movement of a man who had been asked to leave and had not yet understood why. This step was chosen, deliberate, placed with the full weight of everything I now knew and everything I intended to do with it. There was no road back from it. I had not expected to feel anything as clean as that, but I did. The door opened and everything came back at once. Not gradually all at once the way warmth and sound return, after you have been standing long enough in the cold for your body to forget what it was missing. Shepard's quartet was mid-phrase, something slow built on a walking bass line that moved through the floorboards before it reached the ear. The chandeliers threw overlapping circles of light across 30 tables of white linen. I could smell gardenias and candle wax, and underneath both, the faint cedar of Dunleath's old woodwork, a building that had absorbed the smell of occasions like this one for 150 years, and had apparently decided to keep all of them. Everything was exactly as I had left it. That was the thing. The reception had continued without interruption in the 45 minutes I had been gone, because nothing that had passed between Cassian and me in the parking lot had altered a single element of this room. The guests were the same. The music was the same. The candles had burned down perhaps a quarter of an inch. The world inside these walls did not know. Dorothea materialized at my left elbow the way she always does, without warning, with a champagne flute in hand and the composed expression she wears when she is managing a room and would prefer no one comment on it. "Where did you go?" Low even, calibrated for the space between us. "Needed some air." 38 years of marriage is an education in shared register. The gardenia arrangements in the corridor stronger than I expected. She held my gaze 1 second longer than she would have if she'd believed me entirely. Then she assessed the room, found something that required her attentions, and moved toward it. "Don't disappear again," she said without turning. "Marlo's been asking." I watched her go. Dorothea, 35 years of teaching other people's children. A composure built from something more durable than circumstance, working the room with the same fluid grace she brought to everything, entirely unaware that the man she had welcomed into our family was standing 40 feet away and had been planning to take the next 20 years of her life. I turned to face the room. I want to describe what it is like to look at a space you have been inside for 2 hours, when everything you know about it has shifted. It is not dramatic. The way revelations are dramatic in the stories people tell afterward. It is quiet. It is the quiet of a man who has read the same drawing twice and understood it differently the second time, not because the lines have changed, but because he finally knows what he is looking at. I had been trained for 30 years to read a space, load paths, points of failure, the structural logic beneath the surface presentation. I had walked into Dunleath tonight as a father and read it the way fathers read such things. Now, I read it the only way that mattered. Calloway was at the east end of the hall near the bar. His back was to the solid plaster wall, no door, no window at that height. From his position, he had a clear sightline to the main entrance at the south end and to the garden corridor door at the north. Both exits visible, no approach from behind. His head moved in a pattern I could now name 3 seconds on the conversation he was holding, one of Marlo's photography clients. I thought then a brief unhurried scan of the room. 3 seconds, scan, 3 seconds, scan. He was not socializing, he was monitoring. I moved my gaze before it could be read as anything except a man re-entering a party and finding his bearings. It stopped at table 7, a woman, 34 or 5. Hair that shade of auburn that reads as red in candlelight worn to the shoulder. Her dress was correct for the occasion in every detail, the right length, the right formality, the right amount of jewelry. She looked like a wedding guest, in exactly the way a careful attention to looking like a wedding guest produces. She was not speaking to anyone at her table. In a room where conversation was the primary occupation, she sat with an untouched glass of white wine and her attention directed at intervals of approximately 4 minutes. Toward the east end of the hall, toward Calloway. Not the way you look at someone who interests you, a different kind of looking, purposeful, the specific attention of someone tracking conditions rather than observing them. I pulled the guest list from memory. Dorothea and I had reviewed it 2 weeks ago. At the kitchen table, 112 names organized by table. Table 7, 2 couples from Marlo's Nashville network, a Vanderbilt roommate, a couple from Garrison's Atlanta practice. None of them matched the woman I was looking at. I filed it. A dimension that didn't align with the drawing noted, held not yet interpreted. Across the room, Calloway completed his scan interval and found my eyes. He smiled. The full construction of it, warm, familial, the smile of a man genuinely glad to see his father-in-law return. He raised his glass an inch. I smiled back. And I understood clearly and for the first time that a smile carries no information about what is held behind it. That what a face does and what a mind contains can exist in entirely separate rooms with no corridor between them. Near the garden door at the north end of the hall, Cassian occupied the space the way he occupied all spaces, without drawing attention to it. He met my eyes, a single brief inclination of his head, nothing that would read as communication to anyone watching. To me, it was a blueprint. I set my empty glass on the nearest table, straightened my jacket, felt one final time, the pocket watch against my ribs. Then I began to move unhurried the trajectory of a father crossing a room to say something ordinary to his daughter's new husband. The first question was already in place. I once told a studio class that the most accomplished buildings are the ones that look inevitable from the outside. No seams, no visible effort. Just form and proportion working together so quietly that you stop looking for how it was done and simply accept that it is. The complexity, the calculations, the tolerances, the load transfers that make the whole thing stand is completely hidden. That is the point. You are not supposed to see the structure. You are supposed to see the result. 6 months ago, at a dinner in Marlo's Nashville apartment, I had sat across a table from Calloway Reed for the first time and felt something I did not have language for, not suspicion. I had no reason for suspicion then, something more like the faint unease you feel standing in a room whose proportions are slightly wrong. Nothing you can point to. Nothing a layman would notice. Just the quiet signal of a trained eye registering that the numbers do not quite resolve. I had filed it away as the natural discomfort of a father meeting the man his daughter had chosen. I had told myself I was projecting. Tonight, I was going to find out exactly where the load was being transferred. He saw me coming from 15 feet away. I know that because his scan interval completed at precisely the moment I entered his sightline, and he held my position for a half second, longer than the rest of the room, before returning to the conversation he was managing with one of Marlo's Nashville contacts. By the time I covered the remaining distance, his face had arranged itself into the expression he wore for me, warmth at the appropriate wattage, the particular quality of attentiveness that says you matter to me because you are the father of someone I love. It was a very good construction. "There he is," he said, and extended his hand. The handshake was exactly what it had always been, firm, held a beat longer than necessary, the physical language of a man who wants you to feel received. "Thought I'd lost you for a while," I said. I let the warmth come through in my voice without effort because the warmth was real. That was the strange thing about the next 20 minutes. The love was real. It was everything else that wasn't. Marlo appeared at his side, as she had been doing all evening, drawn to him the way people are drawn to warmth, without asking what is generating it. She touched my arm briefly. "Dad, I was looking for you. I was getting some air. You look beautiful." She did. She looked the way she had looked at 9 years old on the first day of school, holding my hand in the parking lot. Absolutely certain that whatever was waiting on the other side of that door was worth the fear of walking through it. I had thought about that parking lot recently, about what it means to love someone enough to walk them towards something you cannot protect them from. "I'll steal your dad for a minute," I said to her, and Marlo smiled the smile of a woman at her own wedding who has no reason to read anything into an ordinary sentence. She moved back toward Vesper. Calloway and I were for practical purposes, alone in the way two men can be alone at the edge of a busy party conversation, flowing on all sides, no one positioned to listen closely. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Better than I expected, honestly." He turned slightly so we were both facing the room, rather than each other, the social geometry of two men discussing something in parallel rather than face to face. He had done that deliberately. I had done it deliberately too for different reasons. These things have a way of moving faster than you plan for. They do. I let a beat pass. "I was thinking about your Charlotte development. The mixed-use project you mentioned in the spring. Marlo showed me some of the renderings." "Southline?" He said it without hesitation. "Phase 2 is pushing into Q2 next year. Permitting in Mecklenburg County has been a small calibrated exhale, what it always is. Mecklenburg," I nodded. "I did a historic preservation project in the 4th Ward years ago, before they started calling it NODA." A pause. "You said the anchor tenant for the retail component was a regional hospitality group. Regional medical, outpatient clinic ground floor, retail wrapping the exterior on the Tryon Street side." I nodded again slowly the way I used to nod, when a junior draftsman handed me a drawing that had a problem I was not going to name immediately. In the spring, over the phone the first time Marlo had put us together to discuss the investment, he had told me the anchor was a hospitality group, a boutique hotel component on floors 3 through 6. I had asked specifically because hotel structural loads are different from office or medical, and the question had mattered to me. The anchor had just changed disciplines. "Smart use of the ground floor," I said pleasantly. "What firm did you use for the structural work?" "We brought in a Charlotte-based group. Smaller outfit, they move faster than the big names, and the quality has been consistent." "I know the feeling." I did. "Where did you do your graduate work?" I don't think I ever asked. "It's at University of Georgia." No pause. "Smooth as the rest of it." "Real estate development program, finished in 2007. I filed it next to the memory of a Sunday dinner in Atlanta 4 months ago. Garrison passing the rolls and asking the same question the way surgeons ask questions, as if he already knew the answer and was checking whether you did too. Calloway had said Vanderbilt. He had named a specific professor. He had described a seminar on public-private development partnerships that he said had changed how he thought about the field. University of Georgia, Vanderbilt. I now held 2 different graduate programs from 2 different institutions in 2 different states, both attached to the same man, neither delivered with any apparent awareness that the other existed. I took a sip from the glass of water I had collected somewhere between the door and this conversation, set it down on the high-top table beside us. "Which firm were you with?" I said, keeping my voice in exactly the same register it had occupied for the last 6 minutes. Warm, conversational. The curiosity of a retired professional talking shop with a younger man he respects, before you went independent, son. The word son sat differently in my mouth than I had expected. Not heavy, just precise. Calloway looked at me. For one single beat shorter than a breath, not long enough for anyone at the surrounding tables to notice something move behind his eyes. Not fear. Something more like recalibration. The half-second of a system locating a file it should have had ready and finding the access slower than usual. Then the smile resumed, full wattage. He gave me a name. It was not the name he had given Garrison at dinner in March. It was not the name he had mentioned to Marlo's photography colleague at the Nashville opening in February, which Marlo had relayed to me afterward in passing because she had been pleased that he had connected with someone in her world. 3 dinners, 3 different firms. One man who had worked, apparently for all of them, and none of them depending on who was asking. I smiled back at him and said that it sounded like solid experience, and I meant none of it, and he had no idea. There is a particular way a father looks at his daughter that has nothing to do with the occasion. It does not matter whether she is standing in a kindergarten parking lot in a plaid jumper or across a lit reception hall in 30 feet of ivory silk. The look is the same. It moves through every version of her you have carried in memory and lands without warning on the one standing in front of you, and in that landing you see all of them simultaneously. The 9-year-old, the teenager, the young woman who called you from a hospital parking lot after her first marriage ended and said, "I'm fine, Dad," in a voice that meant the opposite. All of them, layered, simultaneous, irreducible. I had been watching Marlo for the last 10 minutes from across the room, and I had been having that look, and I could not stop having it. She was near the garden window, with Vesper laughing at something her hand around a champagne flute she had been carrying all evening without drinking. The late light from outside caught the embroidery on her dress in a way that made it look like the fabric itself was lit from within. She had worn her hair the way she wore it for every occasion that mattered to her, pinned loosely, a few pieces left down. The way she had worn it since she was 17 and figured out that it suited her and never changed it. She looked like joy. That was the thing I kept returning to in the parking lot and the corridor in the 8 minutes since I had walked back into this room. She looked like a woman who had arrived, after difficulty and loss and the particular patience required to try again at a moment of genuine joy. And I was the person who was going to have to take that apart. I moved toward her without any plan beyond the first sentence. "Hey." I touched her shoulder lightly as I reached her. "Can I borrow you for a minute before things get going?" Vesper read the room the way a good friend reads a room without being asked to, and without making it visible that she has done so. She said something light and moved away, and it was just the 2 of us standing at the corner of the hall nearest the south window, where the distance to the nearest occupied table gave us the margin I needed. Marlo looked at me. She had her mother's way of reading a face, the particular attention that Dorothea brought to everything, the quiet assessment that had nothing performative about it. She looked at me for approximately 2 seconds, and the quality of her expression changed. Not alarm, something more like the attention of a person who has been waiting for something without knowing they were waiting, and has just been given the signal that it is here. The champagne flute went still in her hand. "What is it?" she said. Not as something wrong. She already knew something was wrong. She went straight to, "What is it?" The way my children have always gone straight to the thing, because I raised them to. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to know I'm asking because I love you, not because I'm questioning anything about tonight." The second sentence was technically not entirely true, but the first one was true enough to carry both of them. "Okay." Still watching me. "The account at First Tennessee, the joint one, the savings we set up when you first moved to Nashville." Something moved in her eyes. Briefly, she did not look away. "What about it?" "There was a transfer, $95,000, about 7 weeks ago." I kept my voice the way I had kept it with Calloway, even conversational, giving the words room to land without pressure. "Into a fund Calloway had identified. I know you authorized it. I'm not asking whether you did it. I'm asking whether you understood the full structure of where the money went." Marlo was quiet for a moment. The jazz had modulated into something slightly slower, and the sound of it moved through the room behind her like a tide coming in. "It's an investment," she said. "Commercial real estate regional fund." He walked me through the whole thing. The projected returns are who signed the authorization documents. A pause, shorter than the one that had preceded it, but different in quality. "I did," she said. "It was my account. I had to. And Calloway's signature." She started to answer, and then she stopped. I watched it happen, not dramatically, not the way it happens in the stories people tell, where the moment of realization arrives in a rush and changes everything at once. It happened the way it actually happens, which is slowly and quietly and with a particular kind of stillness, the stillness of someone who has said something out loud and is hearing it for the first time as it actually sounds. "He said the fund structure required the account holder to authorize directly," she said, carefully, "the way you say something when you are listening to yourself say it, for compliance reasons, so that the transfer was on record as coming from the principal." "Did you read everything you signed, sweetheart?" I said it as gently as I have ever said anything. "Every page." The question sat between us. I remembered a Saturday morning in July, 12 years ago, Marlo at 12, on her bicycle in the driveway, the wheel catching on a crack in the asphalt the fall. I had been on the porch, and I had seen the whole thing, and I had already been moving toward her by the time she hit the ground. She had looked at her knee, which was bleeding, and then looked up at me with the particular calm of a child who has already decided she is going to be fine and just needs someone else to confirm it. "Dad, am I okay?" And I had said yes, and I had believed it, and it had been true. And I had said yes, and I had believed it, and it had been true. I was not going to be able to say yes tonight. "Dad?" Her voice had changed. The register of it had dropped from the brightness she had been carrying all evening to something quieter and more fundamental, the register she uses when nothing else applies. "What are you trying to tell me?" I looked at my daughter in her wedding dress in the low gold light of this room that had been holding celebrations for 150 years. And I could feel the shape of every word I needed to say next, and I could feel the distance between those words and this moment, and I could feel that distance closing. There was nothing easy on the other side of it, but she had asked me directly, and she had always deserved the direct answer. Sometimes the truth does not arrive as a shock. It arrives as the exhale of someone who has been holding something too heavy for too long, held it through the ordinary days and the difficult ones, held it through the moments when it would have been easier to put it down, held it because putting it down would have required admitting that it was there in the first place. And when it finally releases, it does not sound like shattering. It sounds like the end of effort, a breath that has been waiting without permission for a very long time. I told Marlo what I needed her to know. Not everything, not the full architecture of it, not the shell companies or the Nevada Wire or the Montana LLC or the conference photograph from 2019. I gave her the frame without the details, because the frame was what she needed, and the details would come in their own time when there was space for them. I told her that Cassian had been conducting an official federal investigation, that Calloway's identity had inconsistencies that went beyond paperwork, that the money in her account was part of a pattern the FBI had documented across 4 states. I watched her face while I said it. She did not look shocked. That was the thing I had not prepared for, not because I should have been surprised, but because some part of me had hoped I would be wrong about what I had seen in her eyes in the 10 minutes before this conversation. But Marlo looked at me the way a person looks when they have been given language for something they have been carrying without it, and the language is both a relief and a reckoning simultaneously. When I finished, she did not say anything for a long moment. The jazz behind us had settled into a quieter passage, one of those unhurried stretches in the middle of a set where Shepard seemed to be giving the room space to breathe. The bass walking a slow line beneath a piano that was doing very little and making it sound like intention. The guests at the nearest tables were in their own conversations, their own evenings, their own ordinary versions of this Saturday in October. Marlo turned and looked out the south window. The last of the daylight was mostly gone now, and the glass gave back a reflection of the room rather than the grounds she was looking at the room from outside it or at the ghost of herself superimposed on the dark garden. 3 weeks ago, she said. She said it to the window, not to me. His laptop was open on the kitchen table. I was walking through. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't. She stopped. The champagne flute was still in her hand, still untouched. There was an email. The name at the top of the correspondence was different. Not Calloway Reed, a different name, but the signature block had his phone number and the bank account in the footer. It was the same one I'd been transferring into. She was quiet for a moment. I asked him about it that evening. I tried to sound casual, like it was just something I'd noticed, and he explained it the way he explains everything. A pause. He said it was an old corporate account from a previous entity he'd wound down, that the name difference was a registered trade name issue during the dissolution process, that it was a legal technicality he'd been meaning to clean up. He said it like it was nothing, like I was supposed to feel slightly embarrassed for asking. "And you believed him," I said gently. Not a question, just a door I was leaving open. "I believed him," she said, "or I chose to." She turned from the window and looked at me then, and her eyes were red at the edges, not from crying. Not yet, but from the particular pressure of holding something that wants to become tears and not allowing it to. Not here, not in the middle of this room in front of 100 people. I knew Dad. Her voice had gone very quiet. The register of it, stripped of everything the evening had asked her to perform, was the same voice I had been hearing since she was 5 years old. I think I always knew something wasn't right. Not all of it. I didn't know what I know now, but that feeling. The one that shows up and you don't have a reason for it yet. She looked down at the glass in her hand. I kept thinking if I just gave it more time, found a reason that made sense, it would resolve. That I was the problem. That I was looking for something to be afraid of because I'd been afraid before. I did not say, "Why didn't you tell me?" I will not pretend the thought did not exist. It existed briefly, and then I understood it and let it go. Because I knew exactly why she hadn't told me. You do not tell the person who loves you most about the thing that would confirm your worst fear, because telling them makes it real in a way that carrying it privately does not. And because the man she had chosen was the first thing in 7 years that had made her feel like the version of herself she had been working toward, and she was not ready to find out he was borrowed. I also did not say it because I had done the same thing. 6 months ago, in the garden in Savannah, pulling off a work glove to answer a phone call, hearing the brightness in her voice and filing away the small, formless unease I had felt. The first time I met Calloway, the thing I had told myself was the projection of an overprotective father. I had not looked at it directly. I had chosen for reasons that felt like generosity at the time not to look. We had both been afraid of the same thing in the same way at the same time, and we had each been alone in it. I wanted it to be real, Dad. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time and is only now finding air, so badly that I filled in the gaps myself. I knew. I think I always knew something was off, and I kept going anyway. The jazz moved into a new phrase. Someone at a nearby table laughed at something. A real laugh unguarded the sound of a person inside an ordinary evening. The sound of everything this room was supposed to be. I looked at my daughter. She was not the woman who had walked down the aisle this morning, with certainty she had borrowed from hope. She was not the bride in the photographs Vesper would have been taking all evening. She was Marlo, 34 years old, standing in a corner of a ballroom, in a dress that suddenly seemed to belong to a different version of this day. And she was looking at me the way she had looked at me from the driveway 12 years ago, standing up before I could get to her, waiting to find out whether she was going to be okay. "What do we do now, Dad?" She asked it the way she asked things when she had already decided to face what was in front of her, and was just confirming she was not doing it alone. Not a plea. Not a question that needed to be answered before she could act. A question that was already on its way to becoming a decision. I reached out and took her hand. Not a gesture for the room, not performance, just the specific weight of a father's hand around his daughter's, the same weight it had been when she was 9 and 12 and 23, and every age she had ever needed it, and the same weight it would be after tonight when this was over. "We finish this?" I said, "together." She looked at our hands, then at me. She nodded once the way she nods when something is decided and she's ready. Not easily and not without cost, but decided. We both understood that together did not mean simply. It meant the opposite of simple. It meant the next 30 minutes of this evening and the weeks and months after them, and all the ordinary days she would have to reconstruct from something that had been built on nothing. But she was still standing. She had always been standing before I got to her. My father once told me that a good question is more powerful than a good answer, because the answer only closes one door, but the right question opens every wall. I had spent my career asking the questions that engineers and contractors did not want to be asked. Not aggressively, not dramatically. Simply with the patience of a man who already knows the answer, does not match the drawing, and is waiting with professional courtesy. For the moment when the person holding the drawing understands that too. I had never applied it to a person before tonight. Marlo walked back into the main hall beside me without speaking. She did not need to speak. She had made her decision in the corner by the south window, and she was carrying it now, the way she carried every decision she had ever made, quietly, without fanfare, as if the deciding had already happened somewhere interior, and what was visible now was simply the consequence of it. I could feel Cassian at the far end of the room, before I located him visually, that awareness you develop of where a person is, when you have known them their entire life, and they are the fixed point you are navigating around. He was near the garden corridor door, exactly where he had said he would be. Calloway was at the East Bar. He had acquired a fresh glass of something amber, and was in conversation with Brennan, the wedding MC, who was laughing at something with the easy warmth of a man who considers himself good at his job. Calloway's posture was what it had been all evening, relaxed, positioned with precision, aware of every entrance without appearing to be aware of anything except the person in front of him. Beatrix appeared at my right elbow, which did not surprise me. She had her mother's gift for materializing exactly where something was about to happen, and she had her own gift, 20 years of civil litigation, for knowing when a room was about to change temperature. She did not say anything. She simply arrived with Garrison a step behind her, and looked at me with the focused attention of someone who has already started reading the brief. I looked at her, a very small nod. She held my eyes for a moment, then let her gaze move to Calloway, the way a lawyer looks at a witness before cross-examination, establishing the geometry of the space. She understood. I moved toward the bar. Calloway saw me coming, with enough time to complete his laugh at whatever Brennan had said, register my trajectory without reacting to it, and half-turned to include me in the conversation by the time I arrived. A completely natural piece of staging. Everett, warm opened the volume of a man welcoming family. I was just telling Brennan about I want to make sure I have this right, I said. My voice was conversational. The volume of it was appropriate to the distance between us, not raised. Not lowered, simply calibrated for two men talking at a wedding reception. Brennan correctly reading the specific frequency of something he was not part of. Found a reason to be elsewhere within 15 seconds. Your graduate program? I let the sentence sit for just a moment, the way you pause in a blueprint review before you point to the discrepancy. Was it Georgia or Vanderbilt? Calloway smiled. Georgia. I mentioned that the real estate development program. The smile did not flicker. Why do you ask? I must have gotten confused. Garrison had mentioned Vanderbilt at dinner in Atlanta. I thought that was what you'd said. I returned the smile with the same temperature he offered it. These things get mixed up. The Charlotte project reminded me the anchor tenant on the Tryon Street frontage. I was describing it to an architect colleague of mine, and I want to make sure I have the right details. Something moved in his eyes. Not alarm, not yet. The same half-second of recalibration I had seen in Task 9, the system locating a file, finding the access marginally slower than it should be. Regional medical, he said. Outpatient clinic ground floor. Right, because I had it in my mind as hospitality boutique hotel component upper floors. Must have been a different project. I nodded slowly, the nod of a man accepting a correction. And the development group you were with before you went independent, I've been blanking on the name. Someone asked me at the firm last week. The smile held. But it held the way a structure holds when the load has exceeded the design tolerance, visibly effortfully, with a quality of effort that was not there before. He gave me a name. It was not the name from Task 9. It was not the name from the February opening. It was a third name, clean and unfamiliar, delivered with the same fluency as the others. Marlo was standing 3 feet to my left. She had not moved since we reached the bar. She was watching her husband answer her father's questions, and I did not look at her directly. But I could see her in the edge of my vision, the particular stillness of someone watching a performance they have seen before and are only now understanding is a performance. Beatrix had moved. She was at the near end of the bar now, Garrison beside her, positioned with the unhurried naturalness of two people who had happened to drift in that direction. She had her champagne flute in her right hand, and her full professional attention on the conversation in front of her, and the stillness of a litigator who has identified the moment and is waiting for it to resolve. I continued. I asked about the Delaware registration structure, framed as the curiosity of a retired professional who had dealt with commercial entities in his career, who found the mechanics of business formation interesting, Calloway answered. I asked about the timeline when Meridian Capital had been registered, when the investment structure had been formalized, how the fund reported to investors. Calloway answered. Each answer was smooth. Each answer was wrong in a way that was not individually visible but accumulated question by question. Like hairline cracks spreading through a facade, nothing structural in isolation, everything structural together. The room around us had quieted, not dramatically. Shepard had moved into a quieter passage, whether by instinct or by Cassian's arrangement, I did not know, and the particular acoustic of a room, dropping 10 decibels, had caused the nearest tables to lower their own conversations slightly. The way people unconsciously match the volume of their environment, the space around the bar had become, without anyone making it so, more attentive. Calloway felt it. I watched him feel it the moment when a man who has been reading a room all evening detects a shift in the current he has been navigating and cannot immediately locate its source. He looked at Marlo, she looked back at him, and she did not smile. That was the moment, not the questions, not the inconsistencies cataloged and compounding. The moment was Marlo looking at her husband and not smiling after an entire evening of looking at him like the answer to a question. She had stopped asking, and something in his expression registering that the ground he had been standing on had changed composition. He looked back at me. I think there might be some confusion here, sir. The warmth was still present, but it had thinned the difference between a wall and a scrim, between something solid and something that functions as solid as long as no one tests it. Perhaps we should take this somewhere more. Yes, I said. He stopped. There is confusion. I reached into the inside breast pocket of my jacket. The motion was unhurried, but not on my part. I produced the folded sheet of paper and held it between us, not opening it, not offering it simply present the way an exhibit is present before it is entered into evidence. The room was very quiet. Before I reveal the moment that destroys everything Calloway has built tonight, comment 13, so I know you're still with me. This is the moment the whole evening has been waiting for. Quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but if this isn't the content you're looking for, it's okay to step away now. A photograph does not argue. It does not explain itself, does not apologize for what it contains, does not soften its edges for the person looking at it. It simply exists, with the particular patience of a thing that has been waiting in a digital archive on a conference website. In a folder pulled by a federal investigator, 14 months into a case, for the moment when someone with sufficient reason to look finally looks. I unfolded the sheet of paper. It was standard letter size, matte finish, printed on the portable unit. Cassian had described the same image I had held in my hands in the parking lot 90 minutes ago. Now warm from my jacket pocket, carrying the specific weight of something that has been waiting for the right room. I set it on the bar between us. The photograph was what it had always been. A networking sessions, tables with white linens, conference lanyards. The banner for the Nashville Business Development Summit visible in the upper right corner. March 2019. In the lower left quadrant, a cluster of 8 people in the informal geometry of a mid-afternoon break. 2 men shaking hands, one of them, me, younger by 5 years. Name badge on my lapel, half turned in the frame. The other, with dark hair worn slightly longer, a close-trimmed beard, a navy suit, no tie. Calloway looked at the photograph. 1 second. 2. I don't see the relevance. He said it the way he said everything smoothly, with the assurance of a man accustomed to moving language around obstacles. That's a conference photograph. I attend a lot of industry events. The lighting isn't clear, and it was 5 years ago. That's interesting, I said, because I remember the conversation quite clearly now. I kept my voice exactly where it had been, the conversational even, the voice of a man reporting something factual. You asked about my daughter. You asked where she lived, what she did for work, whether she was seeing anyone. I paused. I told you she was a photographer in Nashville. I gave you her first name. I was proud of her, and you seemed interested, so I told you. The room was very quiet. It had been getting quieter since the moment I produced the folded paper. The The way a room gets quiet when the specific frequency of a conversation shifts from social to consequential, and the people nearby begin without deciding to listen. Shepard had brought his quartet to a complete stop. I was not certain when exactly that had happened, and the absence of the music made the space feel larger than it was. The high ceiling of Dunleath's ballroom, suddenly present and attentive. Brennan the wedding, M.C., was standing near the north side of the room, with the expression of a professional whose evening had moved entirely outside his professional preparation. Marlo was looking at the photograph. She had not touched it. She was looking at it from the distance of a person who wants to be certain before they commit to what they are seeing. The way you look at something that is going to cost you something to believe. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Calloway. "That's you," she said. She said it the way you say a thing, when the saying of it is the act, not a question, not an accusation, not the opening of a conversation, a statement of fact, delivered in a voice that had gone very quiet and very clear. The voice of a woman who has just watched a version of reality she had been maintaining, close without her consent. Calloway turned to her. The warmth came back specifically calibrated, aimed directly at her. "Marlo, whatever you're thinking, show us a valid ID." Beatrix stepped forward from the right side of the bar. 20 years of civil litigation had given her a voice that did not require volume. It required precision, and she had an abundance of it. She set her champagne flute on the bar with a sound that was not loud but carried. "Any ID, Calloway, driver's license, passport, anything with a name and a photograph." The request was simple. Civilian legal, entirely reasonable, the kind of thing any person in any room has the right to ask of another person. It required no authority. It required only the willingness to ask. Calloway looked at her. Something happened in the geometry of his expression. Something I had not seen in the 4 hours I had been watching him across this room. The architecture of it shifted, not collapsed, not yet. But the tolerances had been exceeded, and the shift was visible to anyone who had been reading the structure long enough to know what it looked like before. He looked at Marlo again, then at me. Then, for the first time since 4 p.m., when I had walked into this hall holding a bourbon glass, I was never going to drink. He looked at the room, not the way he had been looking at it all evening, that measured 3-second scan, reading exits and entrances, mapping positions, maintaining the comprehensive spatial awareness of a man who always knows where the doors are. He looked at it the way a man looks at a room when he is calculating whether it has become a room he cannot leave on his own terms. His gaze moved to the main entrance at the south end of the hall, to the garden corridor door at the north, to the side entrance near the catering area to the west. He was not assessing, he was searching. Across the room near the garden door, I saw Cassian's right hand move a specific unhurried motion, retrieving his phone from his jacket pocket. Not raising it, not making a call. Typing something, 6 or 7 characters. Then the phone back into the pocket. A message sent, a signal given. I looked at Calloway. He had recovered enough to produce something that resembled his earlier composure, thinner than it had been, and missing the load-bearing elements but recognizable as the same construction. The smile had returned, diminished, like a room with the same furniture but without the light that had made it feel lived in. "I think," he said carefully, "that this has gotten out of hand. I don't know what you think you have, Everett, but whatever this is." He stopped speaking, not because I interrupted him, not because anyone spoke, because the side door to the hallway corridor, the door in the west wall, the one I had come in through 90 minutes ago when I came back from the parking lot, had opened, and a man had come through it, 61 years old. Solid build, gone slightly softer with the years the way men go when they have worked hard all their lives, and the work has stopped. Hair gone gray at the temples and the crown. He had changed something about his appearance, I did not know exactly what. But there was something slightly different about the way he carried himself than the description I had assembled from Cassian's account in the parking lot. And he moved with the careful, deliberate pace of a man who has thought about this walk for 14 months and is not going to hurry it now that it is finally happening. He crossed the threshold. He stopped. He looked at Calloway Reed from across the width of the reception hall of Dunleath Historic Inn, and he did not say anything yet, and he did not need to, because the fact of him standing there, the specific unmistakable fact of this man's presence in this room, was already the most important thing that had happened all evening. And Calloway Reed had gone very, very still. There are people who enter a room and change nothing about it. They find the current and move with it, adjusting, accommodating, becoming part of the atmosphere without disturbing it. And there are people who enter a room and change everything simply by being present, not through volume, not through drama, but through the specific gravity of someone who has arrived with a purpose that the room has no choice but to arrange itself around. Orson Whitfield was the second kind. He moved from the doorway into the body of the hall with the unhurried pace of a man who has been waiting for this walk for 14 months and intends to take every step of it deliberately. The guests near the west wall moved without understanding why, the small instinctive clearance that people make for someone whose intention is visible in the way they carry themselves, even when the intention itself is not yet readable. By the time he had covered half the distance between the door and the bar, a path had opened through the center of the room, as naturally as if it had been planned. I did not speak. There was nothing I needed to add to what was already happening. He stopped in front of Calloway Reed, not close enough to be aggressive, close enough to be present the specific distance of two men who have unfinished business and both understand it. Orson looked at him, the way you look at something you have been searching for long enough that the finding of it requires a moment of simple confirmation before anything else can proceed. You used the name Mercer, Orson said. When you approached me, Elliot Mercer. He said it without inflection, not as an accusation, not as a question, a statement of record. Do you remember that? The room was completely still. Calloway did not answer immediately. I had watched him all evening, the fluid automatic response, the language that moved around obstacles before the obstacles had finished forming. For the first time since I had walked back through that side door at 5 o'clock, there was a pause before the mechanism engaged, not long, not visible to everyone in the room, but present. I don't know what you think you're... My name is Orson Whitfield. He said it the way a man gives his name when the name itself is testimony. I was the chairman of Whitfield Construction Partners in Knoxville, Tennessee. I built that company over 31 years. He paused not for effect, but in the way that a man pauses when he is moving through something that cost him, and he is being careful with the weight of it. 2 years ago, a man named Elliot Mercer came to me with a commercial real estate investment opportunity. Mixed-use development in the Knoxville market projected returns that were detailed and credible, supporting documentation that looked exactly like what legitimate documentation looks like. Another pause. I know what legitimate documentation looks like. I had been reading contracts for 31 years. Nobody in the room moved. I was aware of Dorothea somewhere to my left. I could locate her by the quality of the stillness she was holding, which was different from the stillness of the other guests. A private stillness, a wife and mother. Stillness that had its own texture. I invested $380,000, Orson said. It was the majority of what I had built after the sale of my company. It was the foundation of everything my wife and I were going to do with the next 20 years. He looked at Calloway steadily. Within 6 months, the LLC was dissolved. The accounts were closed, and Elliot Mercer had no documented existence that any investigator or financial institution could locate. Calloway had recovered enough to produce language. I understand you've been through something difficult, but you have the wrong... My wife's name was Margaret. Orson said it over the interruption, not loudly, but with a quality of presence that made Calloway's words fall away like something that had not quite managed to reach the floor. She was 63 years old. She had spent 35 years raising our children and supporting a business and building a life, and what that money represented to her was not a number. It was the proof that the work had meant something, that there was something to show for all of it. He stopped for a moment. She passed away 8 months after the money was gone. The stress, the shame of it, the feeling that she had been made into something foolish, that everything we had trusted had been a surface with nothing behind it. His voice did not change register. It stayed level even with the particular control of someone who has said these sentences before in a hospital room, at a graveside, in a federal investigator's office, and has learned to carry them without breaking. She never recovered. The room held the silence. Marlo was standing at my right. She had not moved since Orson entered, and I did not look at her directly. But in the periphery of my vision, I could see the specific quality of her stillness, the stillness of someone who is assembling something piece by piece in real time, and whose hands have stopped moving because the picture is almost complete, and she is not yet ready for what it will look like when it is. Dorothea had her hand over her mouth. She was not crying. Dorothea does not cry in rooms full of people. She had always considered it a private activity, and she held to that even now, but her hand was at her mouth, and her eyes were closed for a moment in the way they close when something lands that is too large for the ordinary posture of a person to accommodate. Calloway made another attempt. The words were there: defamation, mistaken identity, the threat of legal action. The language of a man who has used legal frameworks as weapons often enough to reach for them reflexively. But the words were hollow in the specific way that true things make false things hollow when placed beside them. Every syllable he produced made the room quieter, because the room was full of people who had just heard Orson Whitfield say, "Margaret and 8 months, and she never recovered." And no construction of language that Calloway Reed could assemble in the next 30 seconds was going to compete with what those words had left in the air. Beatrix had her phone out. She was recording. The civil litigator's instinct document, everything documented. Now, documentation is the difference between what happened and what can be proven. She held it with the practiced stillness of someone who had done this before, in rooms that mattered, and she did not announce what she was doing, and no one told her to stop. Orson looked at Calloway for a long moment. Then he said the last thing. "I promised her." He said it quietly, not for the room, although the room heard it, for Margaret. For the woman who had been 63 years old and had not recovered from the weight of what had been taken from her, and who was not in this room, but was present in the reason her husband had driven to Natchez, Mississippi on a Saturday in October, and changed his appearance and waited in a private suite on the second floor of Dunleath Historic Inn for the signal that it was time to walk downstairs. "I told her I would find you. I told her I would stand in front of you and say her name. I kept that promise." The last words settled into the stillness of the room, like the final stone placed in a foundation, not dramatic, not loud, but structurally complete. The kind of thing that, once in place, cannot be removed without the whole structure coming down. Calloway Reed looked around the room. 120 people, every face turned toward the bar. The quartet, silent instruments down. Shepard sitting with his hands folded, watching. Brennan against the north wall, professional composure entirely surrendered to the occasion. Beatrix with her phone steady. Marlo still. Dorothea still. Garrison still. He looked at every exit, and in his eyes for the first and only time in an evening of performance of calibration, of constructed warmth and manufactured ease, there was no calculation. There was only the look of a man who has understood at last that this is the room he is in, and there is no other room to move to. In 30 years of architectural practice, I learned that no structure stands alone. The wall that looks solid from the street is held by a framework you cannot see from the street. The column that appears to be bearing the load is transferring it to a foundation you would have to dig to find. Every surface presentation has a support system behind it, and the first question a trained eye asks is never what is visible, but always what is holding the visible thing up. I had spent the last 2 hours understanding what was holding Calloway Reed up. I had not finished. It was the motion that pulled my attention, peripheral, unhurried. The specific quality of movement designed not to be noticed. While the room's attention was concentrated at the bar, where Orson Whitfield's last words were still settling into the air like sediment finding the floor of a river, something shifted at the far end of the space. I looked toward table 7. The woman with auburn hair was standing. She had pushed her chair back with the careful, natural movement of someone attending to an ordinary need, the posture of a person who has calculated exactly how unremarkable they need to appear in order to reach a door. Her untouched wine glass remained on the table. Her small clutch bag was in her left hand. She moved toward the main entrance at the south end of the hall with the even, purposeful stride of a professional who has planned for this contingency and is executing it without visible urgency. I looked at Cassian. He had already seen her. He had been watching table 7. I understood this now in the same way he had been watching every other variable in this room all evening. Not continuously, not in a way that would be visible, but with the periodic, deliberate awareness of a man running multiple observations simultaneously and weighting each one according to its probability of becoming relevant. This one had become relevant. His hand moved to his phone, a single motion unhurried contained. He typed something. 6 characters. The phone went back into his pocket before she had covered half the distance to the door. She reached the main entrance. She put her hand on the door. It did not open. Not because it was locked. I do not believe it was locked. It did not open because on the other side of it, in the entrance corridor of Dunleath Historic Inn, There were 2 men from the FBI field office in Jackson, Mississippi, who had been positioned there since before the cocktail hour began, and who had been given specific instructions about which door to stand in front of and when. She stood at the door for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned. From across the room, she found Cassian's eyes with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to look, not searching, locating. They looked at each other for a moment with the particular mutual recognition of 2 people on opposite sides of a situation who understand the situation completely. She did not try the door again. She did not call out. She did not produce any reaction that the guests nearest her could have interpreted as anything other than a woman who had found the door inconveniently engaged and was pausing to reconsider her route. Then she looked at Calloway. And I looked at Calloway. He had seen her. In the midst of everything, Orson still standing 3 feet away, the room holding the silence of his last sentence. Beatrix's phone recording every face in the hall, oriented toward the bar. Calloway had tracked her movement and had tracked its outcome. With the peripheral awareness of a man who was simultaneously managing multiple systems and monitoring all of them, even while one demands his primary attention, their eyes met. It was brief. It was the briefest thing that happened all evening, but it contained more information than most conversations contain in 20 minutes, the specific, compressed language of 2 people who have worked together long enough to communicate in a vocabulary no one else speaks. A question in his expression, an answer in hers. The answer was the smallest movement of her head, a 1/4 inch, barely a gesture, but directed and unmistakable. It said, "No, it's done." Cassian crossed the room to her, without haste. He said something quietly, closed the volume of a man informing, rather than confronting. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. She received them the way a person receives information they have already incorporated and is simply waiting for the official version of. She turned, located the nearest empty table, one of the round tables near the garden window that had been cleared by the departure of its occupants to the dance floor an hour ago, and sat down. She placed her clutch bag on the table in front of her with both hands. She did not speak. She did not look around the room. She sat with the particular stillness of a professional who has made an assessment and arrived at the appropriate response, which was to be, from this point forward, as uninteresting as possible. Garrison had appeared at Beatrix's shoulder. I watched him lean close and say something in a low voice. One hand briefly on her arm, the gesture of a man relaying information he has just assembled and wants her to have. Beatrix absorbed it without moving the way she absorbs everything. And then she closed her eyes for approximately 1 second, and opened them again with the specific clarity of a woman who has just updated her understanding of a situation and is now operating from the updated version. She did not stop recording. I looked at Calloway Reed. He was looking at the table where the auburn-haired woman was now sitting, with her bag in front of her and her hands folded and her eyes directed at nothing in particular. He looked at her for 1 moment, and whatever the look contained, it was not surprise. It was not confusion. It held no quality of a man encountering something he had not considered. It held the quality of a man watching a contingency fail. Then he looked at me. I said it the way I would have said the finding to a client, plainly without drama, as the conclusion of a professional assessment. You didn't come here alone. The jazz quartet behind us remained silent. The room remained still. 120 people were holding whatever they were holding and not moving. Calloway looked at me. He did not answer. And in the silence where the denial should have been, the smooth, rehearsed, immediately deployed denial that had answered every other thing I had put in front of him tonight, there was nothing. Only the silence, which was everything. The moment a person loses all control is quieter than you expect. Not a crash, not a shout. A foundation crack, silent, invisible from the surface, spreading through the structure long before anything above it shows the consequence. I had watched Calloway Reed run calculations all evening. I watched the last one fail. He turned to Marlo, not to me, not to Cassian or Orson or Beatrix. To Marlo because she had always been in his accounting, the one variable he believed he understood. The one investment that had developed weight beyond its original design, or that he needed to believe, had now that every other instrument had been taken from him. He said her name. He said it the way you reach for something, when the drawer is empty and only your hand remains. The warmth was still there, thinner now, worn down to the mechanism beneath it. Whatever you've heard tonight, I can explain it. All of it. His voice had dropped to the register he used when it was only the 2 of them. You know me, Marlo. You know who I am. The room held its breath. Marlo looked at him. I had been preparing somewhere in the back of my mind for tears. The particular destruction of a daughter in a wedding dress with her eyes ruined, I would have found that harder to stand than anything else in the room. But Marlo did not cry. She had done her crying in the years between her first marriage and this one in private in the way she did everything difficult. What was left on the other side of all of it was not grief. It was clarity. "I wanted to believe you," she said. Her voice was steady, not the steadiness of effort, not something held together by will, but the quieter steadiness of something that has moved past the place where effort is required. But wanting isn't the same as knowing, and I know now. She stepped to the side, one deliberate movement that created a space between them, a negative space, the void that gives the solid thing its meaning. She turned toward the door. "Please leave." Not a request, the final sentence of a document that had been closed. Calloway stood for a moment in the space she had made. Then he looked at me. I do not know what he was searching for. Some residual softness in a father who had watched his daughter navigate this for 2 hours, the particular weakness of a man who might at the final moment prefer a version of the evening where none of this was true. I do not know if he had tried this before, whether the father was a variable he had learned to read for opening. I gave him nothing. Not out of cruelty, because there was nothing to give. What I felt was not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter and more permanent. The specific piece of a man who has done what was required and is standing on the right side of it. He looked at the room. 120 people, every face turned. Shepard with his hands folded, instruments down. Orson standing where he had been standing, unhurried, complete. Beatrix with her phone level. Garrison beside her. Dorothea at the far table, hands clasped at her waist. Still in the way she is still when she has understood everything and chosen for this moment not to move. He looked at all of it. Then Calloway Reed, without a word, without apology or admission, turned and walked toward the door. He did not run. He carried the residual architecture of the performance he had maintained all evening, the shape of it still around him, even now, because it was the only thing he had left to carry, and he intended to carry it out of this room with what remained of its structure intact. I reached into my jacket pocket. The pocket watch was there, the Waltham, the family weight of it, the engraving worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. I had brought it tonight to place in the hands of the man my daughter had chosen. I closed my fingers around the case, felt the winding stem, the small imperfection on the back edge where I had dropped it once on a tile floor, and it had survived. I took my hand out of my pocket without removing it. There are things that belong to your family. They stay there. The door opened. On the other side, the October night, the oak canopy, the wrought iron gate on Homachito Street. 2 men from the FBI field office in Jackson, Mississippi, standing in the cooling dark with a federal arrest warrant and the patience of people who have been waiting, because waiting is the work. The door closed. Cassian's phone was already out. One message sent, without looking at the screen, the motion of a man confirming something he has been ready to confirm for 14 months. I looked at Marlo. She had turned back to face the room. 30 feet of ivory silk chandelier, light the last of an October evening, coming through the tall windows behind her. She was looking at me the way she had looked at me from the driveway at 12 years old, not asking to be carried, just asking to be told the truth about whether the ground would hold. No performance, no concealment. Just Marlo in a room that was no longer a wedding, looking at her father without anything left to hide. Across the room, the wedding cake stood untouched on its table. 5 tiers. White fondant. The cutting knife on its folded linen, placed there hours ago, in expectation of a moment that was not going to come. Nobody moved toward it. Nobody was going to. After the large moments in a life, there is always a silence nobody knows what to do with. Not emptiness. The opposite of emptiness, a silence full of everything that has just happened, and everything that has not yet been said, and everything that will need to be navigated in the days and months ahead. The particular silence of a room that was one thing an hour ago and is now irreversibly another and is still deciding what to be next. The guests had begun to leave, not all at once in the gradual, uncertain way of people who have witnessed something they did not come expecting to witness and are not yet sure how to carry it home. Small clusters at the doors, quiet goodbyes, coats retrieved. The catering staff moved through the room with the practiced discretion of professionals restoring order around people who had not yet finished being where they were. The wedding cake stood undisturbed. Cassian appeared at my left shoulder. He did not sit. He stood the way he had stood all evening present, Calibrated, and he spoke at the volume of a man reporting to someone who has earned the report. Both are in custody. No incident. He said it with the particular economy of language that means it went the way it was supposed to go. The Jackson agents processed it cleanly. The Delaware accounts have been frozen under emergency order that came through 40 minutes ago. He paused. The 95,000 active recovery. The legal basis is solid. It's not gone. He paused. Your retirement accounts were flagged and frozen before close of business today. Callaway hadn't had time to move against them. That part held. And the 95, I said. Not guaranteed, but possible. He looked at me steadily. More possible than it was this morning. I nodded. The woman from table 7, I said. Financial coordinator, Cassian said. She managed the receiving accounts, set them up, moved the funds, closed them out. She's done it across at least 3 operations. Her name isn't the one she gave at the door tonight. He said it without satisfaction, the way you report a fact that doesn't make you feel any better for knowing it. She'll be more useful to the case than Callaway is. People like him always rely on someone who does the actual paperwork. And I felt something shift in my chest, not release exactly, not the clean resolution of a weight removed, more like the first degree of a shift. The way a load redistributes when one element finds its bearing, the total weight unchanged, but the distribution altered enough to make the carrying possible in a way it had not been before. Cassian put his hand on my arm briefly, the same gesture I had used with Marlo in the corner 2 hours ago. The gesture that says, I am here, and I am not leaving without requiring language. Then he moved away toward the far end of the room, where 2 men from Jackson were waiting for debriefing. Dorothea came. She did not ask me to explain. She did not ask for the sequence of events, or the legal details, or the names of the accounts, or the timeline of the investigation. She placed her hand on my forearm, her left hand, the one with her mother's ring, and stood beside me in the way she has stood beside me for 38 years, when something was too large for conversation and small enough for presence. We stood there for a moment, looking at the room. Then she spoke, quietly the way she speaks when something has been sitting inside her long enough to have worn a groove. I had a feeling, she said, from the first time. I looked at her, the way he looked at her. She did not look at me. She was looking at the middle distance at something only she could locate. It wasn't the way you look at someone you love. There's a particular quality to that, and I know what it looks like because I have been on the receiving end of it for 38 years. A pause. He looked at her the way someone looks at something they have assessed and found valuable, not cherished, valued. There's a difference. You didn't say anything. I was afraid I was wrong. She said it the way she says things she has already made peace with. I was afraid I was the mother who couldn't let her daughter be happy, who found the problem in everything because the alternative believing being glad required a kind of trust I couldn't quite locate. She was quiet for a moment. So I was quiet, and I watched, and I told myself I was being generous. I thought about the garden in Savannah and a work glove pulled off to answer a phone, and a conversation I had chosen not to ask more questions about. I thought about all the ways that fear wears the costume of generosity. We were doing the same thing, I said. Yes, she said. We were. She left her hand on my arm. That was enough. After 38 years, there are moments when the most accurate thing 2 people can do is stand next to each other and acknowledge that they were both wrong in the same direction at the same time, and that this does not diminish what they have built. Beatrix arrived with Garrison a step behind her. She had put her phone away. The litigator's posture was still there. It is always there with Beatrix. It is structural, but the voice she used was the one she keeps for family, which is softer and more careful than the one she uses for courtrooms. I'll coordinate with the FBI attorney on the civil recovery process, she said. Asset tracing wire fraud remedies the joint account documentation. There's a path. She looked at me directly. It won't be simple, but there is a path, and I will walk every inch of it. Not tonight, I said. Not tonight, she agreed. Tonight you don't have to do anything except be here. Garrison said nothing. He stood beside his wife with his hand at the small of her back, and his presence was the full extent of what the moment required from him, and he knew it. I looked around the hall, white flowers going slightly soft at the edges in the warmth. Candles burned a third of the way down, tables still set with the ghost of the evening they had been arranged to hold, and the cake 5 tiers white fondant the cutting knife on its folded cloth standing at the center of it all with the specific, aching beauty of something prepared for a moment that did not come. There are things that are most beautiful at the point of their incompletion. I had spent 30 years building things meant to last, and I had never understood that until tonight. I looked toward the south window. Marlo was standing there alone, her back to the room, her face to the dark garden, the oaks invisible now beyond the glass, present only as the absence of light. I did not know what she needed, but I knew I needed to go stand beside her, and that the standing would be enough, and that I would find out the rest when I got there. I started walking. People say time heals everything. I have lived long enough to know that isn't quite right. Time doesn't heal. Time creates distance, and distance creates perspective. And perspective gives you the one thing healing actually requires: the ability to choose what you carry forward and what you set down. The healing is in the choosing. Time just makes the choosing possible. I reached the window where Marlo was standing. The oaks were invisible now, present only as darkness beyond the glass, the absence of sky where their canopy blocked it. The same trees that had been there in the parking lot 3 hours ago when everything was still what it appeared to be. They did not know the difference. They had been standing in this ground for a century, and would stand here for another indifferent to every occasion held behind them. I stood beside my daughter and did not speak. She spoke first. "I'm not okay right now." She said it to the glass, not to me the tone of someone reporting a finding, rather than asking for comfort. "But I think I will be." I nodded. It was the truest thing said in this room all evening, not shaped for someone else's reassurance, just the unadorned assessment of a woman taking stock of where she stood and finding that the ground, though damage, was still ground. "I'll hold you to that," I said. She was quiet for a moment. The sounds of the reception had receded, staff moving at the far end, the last guests finding their coats, the specific acoustic of a large space emptying. "Why did you wait?" she asked. "If you felt something was wrong." I had been carrying the answer since the parking lot. "Because of the first time," I said. "Your first marriage. I've spent 7 years believing that was partly my fault, that I saw things and said nothing. And if I had spoken earlier, you might have been spared what came after." I paused. "So when Calloway came along, I decided what I owed you was room. Space to choose without your father, standing at the edge of it, looking for the flaw." I stopped. I was so determined not to make the same mistake twice that I made a different one. Marlo turned from the window. She smiled. Not the bride's smile she had worn all evening, that brightness shaped for the occasion, for the 120 people, for the day she had believed she was living. This was something older, the smile of a daughter who has watched her father be human for 34 years and has arrived at a specific patient understanding of exactly how human he is. Dad. Quiet. Certain. "Her marriage wasn't your fault, and this isn't either. You didn't bring him to me. He found his way here on his own. Whatever he was looking for, he was always going to find someone." She held my eyes. "That's on him, not on you, not on me." I looked at my daughter. I had been carrying a specific weight for 7 years that I had not recognized as a weight, because I had carried it long enough to stop feeling its edges. It shifted, not all at once, enough. Footsteps behind us, unhurried, familiar. Cassian came to stand on Marlo's other side without announcing himself, the way he had been moving all evening, to the right place at the right time, without fanfare. The three of us stood at the window together, looking out at the darkness where the oaks were. I reached into my jacket pocket. The Waltham, the engraving smooth under my thumb, the small imperfection on the back edge from a tile floor 30 years ago that had survived because it was built to survive. I turned it once in my fingers, felt the weight of it. The accumulated weight of every hand before mine, every intention I had carried with me into this evening. I put it back, not discarded, returned to its place near the left side of my chest, where it had been all night. The right person existed somewhere ahead in the ordinary days that follow extraordinary ones, in the slow work of reconstruction. I did not need to know when. I only needed to know it was possible. "What do we do now?" Marlo asked. I looked at her, then at Cassian, then at the darkness, the old trees standing in it, patient and permanent, rooted in ground that had held them for a century. "We go home," I said. Simple, true, the most complete sentence of the evening. The three of us turned from the window. Behind us, the room held what remained of the night flowers, softening at the edges, candles burned low. The wedding cake standing untouched at the center of it all, still beautiful, in the way that unfinished things are beautiful. We walked toward the light, not back to what had been, forward towards something without a name, yet that would take time and work and the ordinary patience of people who have chosen to remain. But forward together. That was enough. There is a verse I return to now, more than I did before that October evening. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you uncomfortable. I used to think God placed that discomfort in our lives as punishment. I understand now it is the opposite. It is the cost of freedom, and it is always worth paying. This is a family story I did not choose to live, but one I am grateful now to have survived. If I could offer you anything from it, it would be this: do not do what I did. Do not confuse silence with kindness. Do not call your fear generosity and your avoidance respect. When something in your spirit says, look closer, the people you love deserve your honest eyes, not your comfortable ones. Family betrayal does not always arrive as a stranger. Sometimes it walks through the front door, holding flowers wearing a name you chose to trust. And sometimes the ones who enable it most are the ones who love the victim most, because love without discernment can become its own kind of blindness. This has been one family story that changed how I see everything, especially myself. My personal belief: no family is immune, but every family can choose how it responds. That choice is where the real character lives. If this family betrayal resonated with something in your own life or someone you know, leave a word in the comments. Your story matters. Share this if it reached you, and stay close to this channel because the next story is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle note: the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and understanding. If that is not the content you are seeking right now, please feel free to step away and find what serves you best. No judgment, only grace.